The Korean winter of 1951 was a beast that gnawed at bones. At the chosen reservoir, the air stung with cold so sharp it felt like a blade against Margaret Callahan's weathered cheeks. Maggie, 58, crouched in a rusted ammunition crate half buried in snow, her breath fogging in the dim light filtering through a jagged tear in the metal. The crate reeked of cordite and damp wool, its walls pressing in like a coffin. Around her, 4 young soldiers shivered, their faces pale under smears of dirt and blood. The distant boom of artillery shook the ground, each thud a reminder of the Chinese army's relentless advance. Maggie's hands, calloused from years of kneading dough and scrubbing pots, gripped a bent ladle, a cook's tool, mocked by these boys who saw her as a grandmother out of place in their war. Maggie wasn't supposed to be here. She'd joined the Army's mess unit to feed troops, not fight. Back in Nebraska, during the Great Depression, she'd stretched flour and potatoes to feed her siblings when banks foreclosed on their farm. That grit had carried her through, earning her a spot in the Women's Army Corps in '43, though she'd never seen combat. Now, at Chosen, her mess tent was a smoldering ruin, and she was trapped with these men, all under 25, who eyed her graying hair and apron with barely concealed pity. To them, she was Aunt Maggie, a relic who belonged in a kitchen, not a battlefield. The crate was a desperate refuge. Their patrol had been ambushed at dusk, Chinese soldiers swarming like shadows through the pines. The squad's radioman, Private Tommy Ellis, had taken a bullet to the shoulder, and Lieutenant Carl Hayes, barely 23, had led them to this crate after their jeep flipped into a ditch. It was a forgotten relic from a Marine supply drop, barely big enough for 5 bodies. Snow had drifted over it, masking their tracks, but the walls groaned under the weight, and every creak felt like a betrayal. Maggie shifted, her knees aching against the crate's icy floor. The air was thick with the sour tang of sweat and Tommy's blood, seeping through a makeshift bandage. Private Eddie Ruiz, a wiry kid from Chicago, clutched his M1 rifle, his eyes darting to the tear in the crate where moonlight spilled in. "They're close," he whispered, voice cracking. "I heard their boots." "Quiet," hissed Lieutenant Hayes, his blonde hair matted with frost. He peered through the tear, his breath shallow. "Flashlights. 2 of them, maybe 100 yards out." His voice held the strain of a man trying to sound in command, but Maggie saw the tremor in his hands. He was green, promoted too fast after the last officer died. The 5th man, Corporal Sam Wheeler, a lanky Texan, snorted softly. "Great. Pinned down with a cook. Shoulda stayed with the jeep." His words stung, but Maggie kept her face stone still. She'd heard worse, farmhands calling her weak when she hauled water buckets, soldiers snickering when she joined the WAC. She'd outlasted them all. Tommy groaned, his face gray. Blood soaked his parka, and his fevered eyes met Maggie's. "Ma'am, hurts bad." She leaned close, ignoring Sam's scoff. Her fingers probed the bandage, sloppy, tied by Eddie in a panic. The wound needed pressure, maybe stitches, but they had no kit, no time. Maggie's mind raced, recalling her mother's tricks with torn flour sacks to bind cuts when doctors were a luxury. "Hold on, Tommy," she murmured, her voice steady despite the knot in her gut. She tore a strip from her apron, pressing it over the bandage. The ladle in her other hand felt heavy, useless, but she wouldn't let it go. It was hers, a piece of home. Hayes turned from the tear. "They're sweeping the ridge. If they find us, we're done." No ammo left but Eddie's clip. His eyes flicked to Maggie, then away, as if she were invisible. "We sit tight, pray they pass." "Pray," Sam muttered. "We're in a tin can with a bleeder and a grandma. We need a miracle, not a prayer." Maggie's jaw tightened. She wanted to snap back, to tell him how she'd kept her family alive when banks took everything, how she'd fed a company of 200 through dysentery outbreaks in '44. But words wouldn't help now. The crate's walls seemed to close in, the cold seeping through her coat, numbing her fingers. Outside, the crunch of snow under boots grew louder, deliberate. A flashlight beam swept past the tear, and Eddie flinched, his rifle clattering against the metal. Hayes shot him a glare. "Easy," Maggie whispered, her voice low but firm. She'd learned to calm spooked horses as a girl. Men weren't much different. Eddie nodded, gripping his rifle tighter. Tommy's breathing grew shallower, each gasp a stab to Maggie's heart. She knew wounds like his, left untreated, he'd be dead by dawn. The crate was a trap as much as a shelter. Its rusted seams leaked air, and the snow piling outside could bury them alive if it kept falling. Maggie's eyes scanned the dim interior, catching glints of metal through the gloom. The crate had held mortar rounds, maybe grenades, but it was empty now, except for a tangle of wire and a cracked wooden crate stamped with faded Chinese characters. Her mind snagged on it. Supply crates like this often came with tools, maybe even fuses or primers. Her years in the mess had taught her to scrounge. Broken stoves, spoiled rations, nothing went to waste. If there was something here, she'd find it. Hayes crouched by the tear, his whisper urgent. They're splitting up. One's circling back. His voice cracked, betraying his youth. Maggie caught his glance at Tommy, then at her, and saw the doubt. He thought they were dead weight. She'd prove him wrong. She crawled to the wooden crate, her fingers numb as she pried at the lid. It splintered, revealing a coil of wire, a rusted wrench, and a small metal tin. Her heart quickened. The tin was heavy, sealed tight. Maybe a flare, maybe something better. She tucked it into her coat, ignoring Sam's muttered, "What's she doing now?" "Checking supplies," she said flatly, her eyes meeting his. "Unless you've got a better idea." Sam looked away, and Eddie gave a nervous chuckle. "Let her tinker, Corp. She's got spunk." Maggie's lips twitched, but she focused on the tin. Her fingers, stiff from cold, fumbled with the latch. It popped open, revealing a greasy bundle wrapped in cloth. She unwrapped it carefully, a detonator cap, the kind used for field explosives. Her pulse raced. Back in '44, she'd watched engineers rig charges to clear a bridge. She'd paid attention, asking questions they laughed off. That knowledge wasn't useless now. Outside, a shout in Chinese cut through the night. The flashlight beams danced closer, now 50 yards away. Hayes hissed, "They're checking the ditch. If they spot our tracks—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Maggie's mind churned. The crate was hidden, but not invisible. The snow was their ally, but it wouldn't hold forever. Tommy's blood was pooling, staining the floor. They needed a way out, and fast. Her eyes fell on the wire again, then the wrench. An idea flickered, dangerous, half-formed, but hers. She'd worked with less. Tommy's groan broke her focus. His eyes fluttered, his voice a whisper. "Maggie, don't let me die here." She squeezed his hand, her throat tight. "You won't, kid. Not on my watch." She thought of her brother, lost to influenza in '36, and the promise she'd made to never let anyone slip away if she could help it. That promise burned now, hotter than the cold. Hayes whispered, "They're closing in. 20 yards, maybe less." His voice shook, but he held his ground. Maggie admired that, even if he didn't see her worth. She glanced at the detonator cap, then the wire. Her mind raced back to Nebraska, to rigging fences with scrap to keep coyotes out. This was bigger, but the principle was the same. Use what you have, make it work. A beam of light swept over the crate, lingering on the tear. Eddie froze, his rifle trembling. Sam cursed under his breath. Maggie's heart pounded, but her hands were steady. She'd been overlooked her whole life, by bankers, officers, now these boys. But she knew things they didn't, things war couldn't teach. The enemy was close, Tommy was fading, and the crate was a death trap. It was time to act. Maggie Callahan's breath hung in the icy air of the ammunition crate, her fingers tracing the detonator cap she'd found. The Korean night pressed against the rusted metal, the cold seeping into her bones as the distant crunch of Chinese soldiers' boots grew sharper. Inside, the cramped space smelled of blood and fear, Tommy Ellis's shallow gasps punctuating the silence. The flashlight beams outside danced closer. 10 yards now, maybe less. Lieutenant Carl Hayes peered through the crate's tear, his young face taut with dread. Private Eddie Ruiz gripped his rifle, his knuckles white, while Corporal Sam Wheeler muttered curses, his earlier scorn for Maggie now tinged with desperation. She ignored him, her mind churning. They needed a way out, and she'd found the tools. Wire, a wrench, a detonator. Her life, Depression-era scrapping, wartime scavenging, had taught her to make something from nothing. Maggie's plan was forming, rough but bold. The Chinese patrol, maybe a dozen strong, was sweeping the ridge, their flashlights probing for tracks. The crate snow cover hid them for now, but Tommy's blood was a ticking clock, and the enemy's shouts were too close. She'd seen engineers in 44 rig explosives with less, detonator caps, wire, even kitchen grease for fuses. The crate's contents could be a weapon, a distraction, or both. Her eyes flicked to the tangled wire and the wooden crate's remnants. If she could rig a charge to a nearby pine or a ditch, it might draw the patrol away, giving them a chance to slip through the frozen forest to a marine outpost 2 miles west. "Hayes," Maggie whispered, her voice steady despite the ache in her knees. "How far's the ditch where the jeep flipped?" He turned, surprised she'd spoken. 50 yards, maybe. Why? There's enough wire here to reach it. And this, she held up the detonator cap, can make a bang. Not big, but enough to spook him. Sam snorted, his breath fogging. "You're gonna blow up the Reds with a soup ladle and some junk? Come on, lady." Maggie's eyes narrowed. "I kept my family fed when we had nothing but dirt. You want to sit here and die, or you want to listen?" Eddie stifled a laugh, but Hayes hesitated, his gaze flickering between doubt and hope. "What's your play, Maggie?" She crouched, sketching in the crate's dirt floor with her ladle. "We rig a charge in the ditch. Use the wire to trigger it from here. They'll think it's an ambush, run toward it. We go the other way, through the pines." She tapped the dirt. "I know these woods. Hunted here with my brother before the war. There's a ravine 1/2 mile north. Narrow, hidden. It'll get us to the outpost." Hayes frowned. "You're a cook, not a sapper. You sure this'll work?" "I watched engineers rig charges in 44. Blew a bridge with less than this. You got a better idea." He didn't. Tommy groaned, his face slick with sweat despite the cold. Maggie's heart twisted. She'd promised he wouldn't die here. She thought of her brother, his coughs echoing in their drafty farmhouse, and how she'd failed to save him. Not this time. The crate creaked as Maggie worked, her fingers clumsy in the cold but precise. She unraveled the wire, coiling it into a manageable loop, and smeared the detonator cap with grease from the tin to waterproof it. The wrench was her anchor. She'd use it to secure the wire to a root or rock in the ditch. The plan was simple but risky. Crawl to the ditch, plant the charge, run the wire back, and trigger it when the patrol was close. The explosion wouldn't kill, but the noise and smoke would buy time. Eddie watched, his earlier nervousness replaced by curiosity. "You really think this'll fool 'em?" "It's not about fooling," Maggie said, tying a knot in the wire. "It's about chaos. They hear a bang, they'll think it's a bigger unit. They'll hesitate. That's our window." Sam rolled his eyes. "And if they don't, we're sitting ducks." "Then we're no worse off than now," Maggie snapped. "You want to shoot it out with 8 bullets? Be my guest." Hayes raised a hand, silencing Sam. "Let her try. We're out of options." His voice held a grudging respect, and Maggie felt a flicker of pride. She wasn't invisible anymore. The flashlight beams were closer now, their light slicing through the crate's tear. A Chinese voice barked, sharp and urgent. Maggie froze, her pulse hammering. The patrol was at the ditch. She could hear the crunch of snow, the clink of gear. If they found the jeep's tracks, they'd follow them straight to the crate. Time was running out. "I'll go," Maggie said, slipping the detonator into her coat. "I'm smaller, quieter. You cover me from here." Hayes shook his head. "No way. You're old." Maggie cut him off, her voice low but fierce. "I've been crawling through mud since before you were born. I know how to move quiet. You don't." Eddie nodded. "She's got a point, LT. Let her do it." Hayes relented, his jaw tight. "Fine. But if you're not back in 10, we're moving without you." Maggie nodded, ignoring the sting of his words. She tucked the wire under her arm, gripped the wrench, and crawled toward the tear. The cold bit at her face as she squeezed through, the snow soaking her coat. Outside, the night was a haze of frost and shadow, the pines looming like sentinels. The ditch lay ahead, a dark scar in the snow. She moved low, her knees sinking into the powder, each step a gamble against discovery. The air smelled of pine and gunpowder, the ground crunching under Maggie's boots. She reached the ditch, a shallow trench littered with the jeep's wreckage. The patrol's voices were louder now, their beams sweeping the ridge above. She worked fast, her hands trembling but sure, burying the detonator in the snow near a twisted fender. She looped the wire around a root, securing it with a wrench, then ran it back toward the crate, unspooling as she went. A beam flashed overhead, and she dropped flat, her heart in her throat. The light passed, and she crawled on, the wire trailing like a lifeline. Back inside, she fed the wire through the tear, her breath ragged. Tommy's eyes were closed now, his chest barely moving. Eddie took the wire, his hands steadier than before. "You're crazy, Maggie," he said, but there was awe in his voice. "Crazy keeps you alive," she replied, wiping sweat from her brow. She connected the wire to the detonator's trigger, her fingers recalling the engineer's movements from years ago. The setup was crude, but it would work. One spark, one bang. A shout outside made them freeze. The patrol was backtracking, their boots crunching just beyond the crate. Maggie's eyes met Hayes's. "Ready," she whispered. He nodded, his doubt replaced by something new, trust. Sam said nothing, but his silence was answer enough. Eddie clutched the wire, ready to pull on her signal. Tommy's hand twitched, and Maggie squeezed it, her resolve hardening. She thought of her mother, teaching her to mend nets with scraps, saying, "You make do, Maggie. Always." That lesson was her weapon now. The beams swept closer, and a voice called out, "Too close." Maggie's hand hovered over the wire. "On my mark," she whispered. The group tensed, their fate tied to her plan. She'd been overlooked, underestimated, but not anymore. They believed in her now, and so did she. Maggie Callahan's hand hovered over the wire, her pulse steady despite the Chinese patrol's boots crunching mere feet from the snow-buried crate. The Korean night was a frozen hell, the air thick with the acrid sting of cordite and the faint metallic tang of Tommy Ellis's blood. Inside the rusted ammo crate, Lieutenant Carl Hayes, Private Eddie Ruiz, and Corporal Sam Wheeler held their breath, eyes locked on Maggie. Tommy's shallow gasps were barely audible, his life slipping away. The flashlight beams sliced through the crate's tear, grazing the snow outside. Maggie's plan, a rigged detonator in the ditch to distract the enemy, was their only shot. Her fingers, weathered from years of kneading dough and mending nets, tightened on the wire. She thought of her Nebraska farm, where she'd turned scraps into survival. This was no different. "Now," she whispered. Eddie yanked the wire. A muffled boom erupted from the ditch, the ground shuddering as smoke and snow burst skyward. Shouts in Chinese split the night, frantic and sharp. Flashlights swung wildly toward the explosion, boots pounding as the patrol rushed to investigate. Maggie's heart leapt. It worked. The chaos she'd crafted bought them time. Hayes peered through the tear. "They're moving. Go now." Maggie grabbed Tommy's arm, slinging it over her shoulder. "Help me," she snapped at Sam, who hesitated, then complied, his earlier scorn gone. Eddie and Hayes pushed through the tear, rifles ready, while Maggie and Sam dragged Tommy into the snow. The cold bit at her face, the crunch of frost underfoot deafening in the sudden quiet. The patrol's shouts faded toward the ditch, but Maggie knew it wouldn't last. They had minutes, maybe less. "North," she said, pointing to the pines. "Ravines 1/2 mile. Move." Hayes nodded, his youthful doubt replaced by reliance. Maggie led, her memory of hunting these woods with her brother guiding her steps. The ravine was narrow, hidden by snow-laden branches, a path to the Marine outpost. Her knees ached, Tommy's weight dragging at her, but she pushed on, driven by the promise she'd made to keep him alive. The forest was a maze of shadow and ice, the pines creaking under the wind's weight. Maggie's breath burned in her lungs, each step a battle against the snow. Tommy's head lolled, his blood soaking her coat. Sam grunted beside her, his strength faltering. "He's too heavy," he muttered. "Keep moving," Maggie growled, her voice cutting through his complaint. She'd carried heavier burdens, sacks of grain, her family's hopes through the Depression. Tommy was no different. Eddie scouted ahead, his rifle scanning the dark. Hayes followed, his eyes darting to Maggie with newfound respect. "How'd you know this ravine?" he whispered. "Hunted here in '46, she said. "Before the war heated up. Terrain hasn't changed." A crack echoed behind them, a branch snapping, or a rifle. Maggie froze, her hand tightening on Tommy. The patrol had realized the ruse. Voices rose, distant but closing. Flashlights flickered through the trees, their beams like hounds on a scent. "Faster!" Maggie urged, her voice low. The ravine was close. She could smell the damp earth beneath the snow, hear the faint trickle of a frozen stream. Her plan hinged on reaching it before the enemy caught up. She glanced at Tommy, his face gray. Her mother's voice echoed, "You make do, Maggie." She'd make do now. The ravine appeared, a narrow gash in the earth, its walls steep and snow-crusted. Maggie guided them down, slipping on ice but catching herself. The group huddled in the shadows, the pines above masking their tracks. Maggie's hands shook as she checked Tommy's pulse, weak, but there. She tore another strip from her apron, tightening his bandage, her ladle tucked into her belt like a talisman. Hayes crouched beside her. "They're coming. We can't outrun them with Tommy." "Then we don't," Maggie said, her mind racing. The ravine was a choke point, perfect for an ambush. She scanned the ground, spotting a fallen branch and a pile of loose rocks. Her eyes fell on her ladle, its metal glinting. An idea sparked, reckless but possible. "Eddie, your rifle," Maggie said, her voice calm but firm. "Give me your bayonet." He blinked but handed it over. She wedged the bayonet into the ladle's handle, creating a crude spear. "Sam, pile those rocks there," she pointed. "Make it look like a barricade. Hayes, help me with the branch." Hayes stared. "What are you doing?" "Making them think we're dug in," she said. "They'll hesitate, maybe call for backup. That's our chance to slip away." Sam, now silent, stacked rocks as ordered. Maggie and Hayes propped the branch to mimic a rifle barrel peeking from the barricade. She smeared snow over it, blending it into the ravine's edge. The patrol's voices were louder now, their beams cutting through the pines above. Maggie's heart pounded, but her hands were steady, her years of improvising, mending fences, rigging stoves, guiding her. She positioned the group behind the barricade. Tommy slumped against her. "When they see this, they'll slow down," she whispered. "We crawl along the ravine's edge. Stay low. Outposts close." Hayes nodded, his trust in her absolute now. Eddie's eyes shone with admiration, and even Sam gave a curt nod. Maggie's chest swelled. She'd earned their respect, not with youth or rank, but with grit. The patrol reached the ravine's lip, their beams sweeping the fake barricade. A voice barked, and the lights froze, focused on the branch and rocks. Maggie held her breath, her hand on Tommy. The enemy hesitated, just as she'd hoped, their shouts turning cautious. She signaled, and the group crawled, inching along the ravine's icy floor. Tommy's weight dragged, but Maggie bore it, her resolve unbreakable. The outpost's lights flickered through the trees, a beacon in the dark. Maggie's legs burned, her coat soaked with sweat and blood. The patrol's shouts faded. They'd bought the ruse, at least for now. The ravine opened to a clearing, the outpost's barbed wire glinting. Hayes waved, shouting for medics. Marines rushed out, their rifles raised until they saw Tommy. Maggie collapsed beside him as medics took over, their hands swift with bandages and morphine. Tommy's eyes fluttered open, meeting hers. "You kept your promise," he whispered. She squeezed his hand, her throat tight. "Told you, kid." Hayes knelt beside her, his face worn but grateful. "Maggie, you saved us. That trick with the detonator, the barricade. I was wrong about you." She shrugged, the ladle still in her belt. Just made do. Sam approached, head bowed. Sorry, ma'am. You're tougher than any of us. Maggie nodded, too tired to gloat. She thought of her brother, her mother, the farm they'd lost. Every hardship had led to this, proving her worth when it mattered most. The outpost's flag snapped in the wind, its stars a reminder of why she'd fought. Not for glory, but for them, Tommy, Hayes, even Sam. As dawn broke, painting the snow pink, Maggie stood, her body aching but her spirit unbroken. She'd turned scraps into salvation, her wisdom outshining doubt. The Marines would talk of this night, of the cook who'd outsmarted the enemy. Maggie didn't need their stories. She knew who she was.